Okay, so today we're diving into something I think we can all relate to. I mean, who hasn't at some point wondered, what should I eat?
A pretty fundamental question, right?
Absolutely. And it's the title of the chapter we're tackling today, Chapter 10. What to eat from this source, all about well-being.
And you know, what's so interesting about this chapter is that it jumps right into this huge debate that's been going on forever in the fields of medicine and hygiene about diet. Right away it mentions vegetarians versus meat eaters.
Yeah, and the cooked food versus raw food people.
Right. Those are like classic arguments that have been going back and forth for ages.
And instead of, picking a side, this source comes at it from a totally different angle. It's like, instead of getting caught up in scientific back and forth, why not look to nature itself for guidance?
Yeah, I like that approach.
So the chapter starts by really examining this whole idea of what we even mean when we say natural.
Right. And it kind of challenges that assumption a lot of us have that civilization, like modern life, is somehow unnatural.
Oh yeah, we have this image of the noble savage, living off the land, and that's the only true natural way to exist.
Exactly. But this source completely flips that idea on its head.
Okay, tell me more. I'm intrigued.
Well, it argues that someone who's using all the advancements that art and science offer, they're actually living the most natural life. Because they're living the most fully human life, using all of their faculties.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see where this is going.
Think about it. We have intelligence. We have this ability to innovate, to create things. That's part of what makes us human, right?
Yeah, if you think about it that way.
So if those are natural human traits, then using them to create better living conditions, that's not like going against nature. It's an expression of it.
Interesting.
And the source gives this great example to illustrate this. It contrasts someone living in a city in a comfortable home with ventilation and all that with someone living in a really primitive state.
So you're saying the city dweller is actually more natural?
In a way, yes, because they're using their human abilities to create a more comfortable, more supportive environment for themselves.
Huh. Okay, that's a pretty thought-provoking way to look at it.
Right. It really makes you reconsider what we mean by natural in this context. And that sets the stage for the whole discussion on what to eat. Because then the chapter goes on to argue that there's this kind of great intelligence, basically, nature, or maybe a divine force working through nature that's basically already decided what's best for us to eat based on where we live.
I see. So it's tying this idea of natural living to diet and saying our environment plays a huge role.
Exactly. It's saying our location, our geography, that's a huge factor in what our bodies naturally need.
Okay, I like where this is going. So how does it break that down? Give me some specifics.
All right, well, let's start with the extremes, okay? So picture the frigid regions, like the far north.
Okay, lots of ice, snow, very cold.
Right. Now, in those environments, the source says you absolutely need what it calls fuel foods.
Fuel foods, what exactly does that mean?
Basically, think high-fat, high-calorie stuff, things that give you tons of energy and keep you warm.
I'm guessing blubber, animal fats, that kind of thing.
Exactly, like the traditional diets of the Inuit and other people in those regions. And there's a good reason for it. See, in that kind of intense cold, you need a crazy amount of calories just to survive.
Just to keep your body temperature up.
Right. And the source points out that in these climates, there's not as much of an emphasis on the kinds of foods that might be needed for, say, lots of physical labor in agriculture, or even for certain kinds of brain development that might be more important in other places.
So it's saying the priority is literally just staying alive and warm.
Pretty much. And it addresses the vegetarian argument head on here too.
How so?
It basically says flat out that plant-based food just isn't available in enough quantity in those regions.
Okay.
And even if it was, it wouldn't give you the calories and the heat you need to live there.
So it's making a pretty strong case that in certain environments, animal fat isn't just a choice, it's a necessity.
Exactly. It's like nature itself is dictating what you need to eat to survive there.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about the other end of the spectrum? What about the tropics?
Well, in those warmer climates, the need for all those heavy fatty foods goes way down. It's not essential anymore.
Makes sense.
And the source points out that in the tropics, people naturally tend toward more vegetarian diets. It even mentions millions of people living and thriving on things like rice and fruit.
So a completely different picture from the Arctic, right?
Yeah. And to really drive that point home, it says that the kind of high-fat diet you need in the Arctic, that would actually be harmful at the equator. Could even lead to, rapid death.
Wow, okay. That's a pretty stark contrast.
Right. So what we're seeing here is that natural diet isn't this one-size-fits-all thing. It's all about adapting to your specific environment.
So it's like the natural human diet changes based on where you are in the world.
Exactly. And the source makes this really interesting claim. It says that if people weren't influenced by, all these medical or dietary experts, they would naturally gravitate towards the foods that are best for them in their particular environment.
It's like saying there's this inherent wisdom in how people have traditionally eaten in different parts of the world.
Right, like nature kind of provides what you need where you need it. And this leads into the discussion of staple foods, which I find so fascinating.
Staple foods. Okay, so what's the source's take on that?
Well, it basically says that this great intelligence, or God, is working through nature to provide these staple foods that are characteristic of a region, the foods that really sustain the population. And while this chapter doesn't go into listing every staple food in every region, you can kind of get the sense that it believes each area naturally provides the carbohydrate base for the people there.
I'm with you. Like, you can think about things like grains in temperate climates, or root vegetables in other parts of the world, or, like we said, rice in many tropical regions.
Exactly. Those are all examples of staple foods. And the source sees those as being like naturally occurring provisions that are perfectly suited to the people living there.
I'm picking up on something here, though. This chapter focuses on this big picture idea of the what to eat, geographically speaking. And it mentions staple foods, but it doesn't get into specific recommendations for people living in, say, a temperate climate with access to all kinds of different foods.
That's a really good point. It's like it's laying the groundwork here.
And I think that's intentional because at the end of the chapter, it actually says the discussion of what to eat is going to continue in the next chapter, chapter 11, which is called How to Eat.
Oh, interesting. That's a great lead-in to the next deep dive.
I know, right? It implies that the what and the how are both super important parts of healthy eating according to this source.
Makes total sense.
So let's bring it all together from this deep dive into what to eat. The main takeaway here is that the most natural and best foods for us, they're determined by where we live, our environment, and by those staple foods that are readily available in our specific geographical zone.
And remember, this isn't just some random coincidence. It's like a form of guidance, according to the source, coming from a greater intelligence working through nature.
And it's really making us rethink that whole idea of natural living, right? Like, it's not about rejecting all the good stuff that comes with civilization.
Oh, no, not at all. It's about recognizing these fundamental principles and how they apply to our food choices.
It's like saying, hey, look beyond the latest diet fads and pay attention to what's been traditionally sustaining people in your region for centuries.
And I can't wait to see where Chapter 11 takes us in terms of hate W to eat.
Me too. But for now, listener, here's something to chew on. Think about your own geographical location and think about those traditional staple foods from your region. What comes to mind? Does thinking about it this way, does it shift your understanding of what a natural and healthy diet might look like for you? It definitely makes you see the connection between environment and food in a whole new light, and we can't wait to dive back in with you next time.